So what do you think about the about like sort of self-defense techniques? So, when I was a young kid, growing up before the UFC started, self-defense stuff was pretty much all like, striking art based, and then there was a lot of BS going on back in the day and like mystical voodoo type stuff. And
Yes.
then it's changed over the years. And as someone that's been around, involved in a lot of older martial arts before, and then you've done jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai and all this stuff now. What are some useful tips, I guess you'd say, or useful arts to get into in regards to self-defense in
Yeah,
your
so
eyes?
so I have a lot to say about this because I come from the original kind of pressure testing of things.
Yeah.
People don't like my answer because it's not sexy. I think you need very simple techniques.
Hmm.
I think you need to do a lot of reps of very simple techniques that are proven. I think you need to be able to do it with clothes on, without clothes on. I think you need to be able to with weapons, without weapons, with gear on, without gear on. I think you need to be able to do it in the dirt, on rocks, on ice, in the snow, on the side of a hill, under a car, inside a car, on the hood of a car. And so the only way to be able to do that is to train that way. So if I were to send you a video of how we train, I don't mean classic jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu classically, but how we train with the military and law enforcement guys, and now even some of the civilian market, we're training that way. And we've been training that way for a long time. Now you can't do that for a long period of time because you're going to be hurt pretty bad. But, training on rocks is different. Training on sand is different. Training, in the backseat of a car where you don't have freedom of movement is different. Training with a gun is different. Training with a knife is different.
Hmm.
And what I'll say about that is, jujitsu, this is a broad stroke. You guys, I love jujitsu and I got a bunch of stripes on my belt.
Sure,
So
sure.
don't take this the wrong way. But jujitsu also has a lot of major flaws to it. And some
Sure.
of those flaws for reality fighting, meaning street fighting, where you have one or more opponents and you have weapons that could be introduced, is that jujitsu, we train on soft mats. We train on soft mats for a reason, because going into concrete or going into anything else like that that's hard is no good. So surface space is a big problem for us for fighting. Number two, we lack mobility in jiu-jitsu, meaning when we get into some type of entanglement on the ground, it's
Hmm.
very hard to disengage, which is not good. And then another thing that happens is we have proximity to weapons. When we're doing jujitsu, we're connected in a way that if I have weapons on my waistline, you have access to my weapons and I have access to yours. So that complicates our problem a lot more. Another problem with jujitsu that we have is you have lack of sight lines, right? So I can't, if I'm on the ground, I can't see up over the hood of a car. I can't see through a window. Also, we spend a lot more energy. There's a lot more fatigue involved in what we're doing than standing up and moving or walking or running, because you're standing on your legs all day. You were meant to do that. You've done that since you were a kid. So there are a lot of flaws to it. The reason to train jujitsu for military and law enforcement is because you get taken there. That's not where you want the fight to go. So you get taken there. Or in law enforcement, that's where you're going to affect the arrest and you're going to be able to cuff from that position. So there are those reasons, but there are a lot of flaws to it. And I think even for me, who absolutely loves jujitsu, I have to recognize these flaws because we pressure test it and we find out what happens when we go out there. And if you guys want, remind me, I'll send you some videos of us doing stuff in the snow with weapons in the back seats of cars, against the hood, how it changes things. Like if you're on a angle, like a slope, a 45-degree angle, and you're rolling down the hill, your jujitsu is not going to work the same as it does when you're on a flat, soft mat, right? And when you're getting hit in the head with a curb, it's not going to work the same way. So, it is probably, from my estimate, just my personal opinion, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, and wrestling are pretty much, the combat sports that I would stick with
Hmm.
for any type of military or law enforcement special operations guys, 100%. But I would modify it to make it as realistic as possible versus, berimbolo or inverted or anything. That's awesome for points and for understanding how it works, but that's not so good for you when you deal with weapons or two or three people and getting stomped. So, for me, if you want to play a certain game, I'm all about it. You should do that. I don't begrudge anybody for doing what they do, but if we're talking about reality, number one, first and foremost, pressure test it. Don't
Hmm.
have an idea without testing it. You have to test it, and you have to test it under stress when
Yeah.
you're smoked.
Yeah, that was like something where, even with the guys, like we obviously do plenty of sport jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. But we still have days where like we do like grappling with fighting. So we're actually fighting each other. There's punches, there's kicks, there's things coming at you. And I think it's super important. And, even like with the guys, I've always told them, like, I encourage the guys to do the striking stuff and do the everything else, do everything. Cause I think it's silly to think that you just need one thing, right? Like one thing and you're complete. And I think you have to get punched. I think you have to get hit a little bit. Like I've seen
100%.
even jiu-jitsu schools like practice self-defense. I've been to a quote unquote self-defense class, and they're like they were catching punches, and they're like there's no one actually punching them. And I'm like, this kind of, we're getting away from what we were supposed to be doing in the first place, because what was cool about jiu-jitsu was it was effective because it was real. We were trying to do this stuff, and now we're kind of going the opposite direction where we're going through like a self-defense situation. None of you guys have got hit, and I'm looking at this as a guy who fought. I'm like, it's way different when you get hit like one good time and your bell's rung a little bit, and then you're trying to grab and grapple and everything else.
Look at this repeatedly. We see this time and time again, and I from Mike Tyson to Stephan Bonner, all these guys have talked about that. And you look at this even recently with Rodolfo Vieira, who is a phenomenal grappler. Look at what happened to him. This low-level grappler finishes him with a guillotine. Why? Because he was smoked and he was making mistakes and he couldn't recover because he was smoked. And that's the difference between a fight. Now, that's a fight with the referee. That's a fight with time limits. That's a fight on a soft mat. Start to add weapons and start to add, a little bit more real scenario. And then you kind of see a different picture. And it's all about what you want to do. But like one thing I'm seeing now, there are a lot of trends, but one trend that I'm seeing now is jiu-jitsu guys teaching a lot of firearms and knife defenses and stuff. And it makes no sense because they've never been in those situations. They're teaching stuff that is going to get people hurt or killed. And that's just really super dangerous. So I would challenge those people to actually test it with a real knife. I mean, you could get a marker, you get a marker, I have a marker, and we're going to see who gets cut. See what happens, because you're going to have marking all over you. Everybody's getting cut. And when you start talking about arterial, right, lacerations or cuts, that's a bad day. You got 30 seconds till you pass out. You got 2 minutes till you die. So you're going to play that game. You're making up these moves and you think that that's going to be good enough. It doesn't work that way.
How do you